Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for Tadaima 2023. This is the Omoide group, that the memoir writing group from Seattle, Washington. And we're just so delighted to have them here today. And we're excited to have you here at the end. We're going to do a little presentation, and then at the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask Q&As. You can see there are people here from the group in the Zoom session with us, and you can ask your questions face to face. So please, during the session, if you think of a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to you. Okay, so thank you so much, and here we go. Let the movie roll.
Hi, Tadaima fans. I'm Lori Matsukawa. I'm a board member of the Nikkei Heritage Association of Washington. We operate the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington. We affectionately call it the J. At the J, we run the oldest continuously operating Japanese language school in the continental United States. We also hold community cultural events free to the public, such as Children's Day, Culture Day, and the very popular All Things Japanese sale. We support taiko classes, judo and karate classes, a Japanese language library, and the Northwest Nikkei Museum, which holds, among other things, music from Nihon Machi, the nation's largest collection of 78 RPM Japanese musical recordings dating from the early 1900s. You should definitely check it out. The J also supports Omoide, which means memories. It's a writing program focused on documenting the Japanese American experience. We have members of Omoide here to share some of their work. Thanks so much for tuning in. Dee?
Hi, I'm really excited to be here today. And, you know, the last 30 years, about 10 to 15 of us, once a month on a Saturday from 1 p.m. to, around 4 p.m., we got together and shared our stories. What we do is bring a story of an incident and share it with the group, something that happened in our memory and in our Japanese history. And then we start asking questions in kibitz and do all kinds of interesting stories ourselves about the others and have a great time. Well, 30 years ago, it started the same way. 4 of my friends, including me, Chuck Cotto, Dell, and Margaret, got together in my kitchen. And first of all, we just had to sit around and talk and chat. Then Christmas came along and we decided that we would write down our stories. So I formatted them in a computer program, PageMaker, and printed it out and went to Kinko and made copies. And we created a cardboard cover for our stories. And that's how Omoide got started. The reason I did that was because 50 years ago in 1970, I got hired by the University of Washington Library Archives to help start a Japanese collection because maybe I spoke a little Japanese. And I interviewed about 30 people. And then going forward from 1970 to 1990s, I decided that instead of just collecting documentation on the Japanese experience, how about if we made some experiences? And that's what we do on the 3rd Saturday of every month. And I'm sort of the manager, and Janine is sort of our coach, and she tells us how to get the bloody words down on the bloody paper.
Thank you, Dee. I'm Janine Brodeen. I've had the privilege of working with Omoide writers for over 10 years. It might be closer to 12 now. Our group meets once a month at the Cultural Center. We focus on writing either personal or family memoirs, either past or present, but they have to focus on the Japanese American experience. So writers in our group either write to a prompt or follow a protocol. For example, many of the stories you're going to hear in this virtual anthology were inspired by a protocol called interviewing a picture. This is how it works. The writer chooses a family picture. It can be from the present or the past. There needs to be some kind of background in the picture. There could be multiple people. There can be animals. Some kind of scenery is great. And then people spend time with that picture and they study it and ask themselves some questions. Who's in the picture? What do things look like, sound like, smell like, or sometimes taste like? The writer may make guesses about what just happened in the picture or what's going to happen or something that might be from the outside of the picture. And what you end up with is a lot of ideas. And then you take those ideas and use them to write a draft. It could be a prose piece or a poem or sometimes a script. So we focus on description and introspection. Description is what things look like, what other senses were in play. Introspection is, what do people feel like? What were they thinking? So when the writer's ready and wants some feedback, that person will bring the story to our Omoide group and read it to us. It's a kind process where the listeners respond as if they're reading the story themselves. We talk about each piece very respectfully. The listeners let the author know what things they noticed or liked. They may ask clarifying questions. They might even offer a suggestion. And the author listens to the feedback and then makes the decision. The author is the decider. That author may take some ideas or may not. Memoirs blend memory with sensory detail to create word pictures. As I often say to the students, and you've already heard this, but I really think it's important, is just put the bloody words on the bloody paper. Many people think they can't write, but they can write. It's just a matter of trusting yourself and getting those words on the paper. Writing's like any other skill. The more we practice it, the better we get. And it's a great gift to be able to ask for and receive feedback from fellow writers on a regular basis like we do in the Omoide group. Thanks so much. And now you get to hear some writers, and I believe we're starting with Lori Matsukawa.
Thanks, Janine. I want you to take a close look at this photo. This is the first and only photo I've seen of my grandmother genuinely smiling. Her name is Hatsumi Oda Shimizu from Hiroshima Ken, Japan. She's on the right. I don't know the name of the woman who is hugging her. All I know is that she's a friend. This is a photo that might have been taken in about 1930. Hatsumi could have been pregnant with my mom at the time. That would mean Hatsumi was 34 or 35, and mom would have been her 8th surviving child. Hatsumi was determined that Hawaii would be her new home. My cousins called Hatsumi Mu Baba. Baba was baby talk for Oba-san, grandmother, and Mu because she and Oji-san ran a dairy. The dairy was on the slopes of Diamond Head in Honolulu, which was covered with dry grass and prickly keawe trees, similar to mesquite. If it was anything like the dairies my uncles ran when I was a kid, there were flies everywhere and the smell of manure too. Along with the mooing of the cows, you could hear doves cooing, mynas squawking as a gentle breeze blew through and tried but couldn't blow away the stink. My grandma barely spoke English, but she had a Japanese-speaking stockbroker and he knew a Japanese-speaking real estate agent. My grandmother was a shrewd investor, and by the time she died at the age of 70, she was able to give plots of land to all 8 of her children. Here's what I wrote. Mu Baba's friend. What is this? Issei don't hug. But we did. Why are we laughing? We're in a cow pasture. But we are. The sun bakes the manure and makes it stink. But we just smell hair pomade and ivory soap. The flies land on our legs and toes poking out from zori. But we feel sturdy shoulders under a cotton dress that flutters in the breeze. Much depends on these large creatures who low and chew. And yet, how happy you appear among them. My children shall inherit this land. 7 of them, you say, with another on the way. A hug, my fearless friend.
Hi, I'm telling the story of my 97-year-old Auntie Onions. We still call her Onions. Yesterday, I spent the afternoon playing Shanghai Rummy with her and her daughter, Ellen. They've downsized to a Villa Geo apartment complex on Yarrow Bay, and that's in Kirkland, Washington. That's after Uncle Hero passed in 2020. Geo did all the scorekeeping and won her share of the hands. Between deals, I had a chance to find out more about how she got the name Onions. Geo explained, "My birthday is in May and I turned 16 in camp. So it must have been April 1942 that we were taken on buses from where we lived on King Street next to the Nichiren Church to Camp Harmony, which is in south of Puyallup Assembly Center. We were in Area C. Were you scared?" I asked. The bus stopped in front of our house to pick up my family and some of our neighbors. There were a bunch of us, so I wasn't scared, but confused because the bus windows were all covered. "What did you take in your bag?" "What were you wearing? I asked. We didn't have much anyway, so I don't remember. As I think about it, we had a toy fox terrier named Junie. When we sang, she would sing too. We had to call the vet, and he came to take her away as we were about to leave. That was so sad. Couldn't worry about what I was taking. We didn't wear jeans in those days. Wooden clogs were the shoes in style, so I wore those with my skirt and sweater. Turned out that the campgrounds were all dusty and muddy, so those shoes really came in handy." Chia went on to explain about her nickname. "I was on my way home, walking along the road from the recreation building. I knew a lot of the guys in the back of the truck as they passed me driving vegetables to the mess hall. Poison Goto and his brother were some of them. Bako Kinoshita threw one of the onions at me and I caught it. Then I threw it back and it went through someone's open barrack window. The next day, they started giving me a bad time about that and started calling me Onions. The more I protested, the more the name stuck. Here's a bunch of nicknames Onions and I recalled. Tomato, Tinky, Gunner, Buster, Beansy, Slug, Lover, Shorty, Gas House, White Christmas, and nothing like a name calling to make their forced imprisonment bearable. When they all meet today, they still call her Onions. I want to just emphasize that now I have a strong purpose in life to leave a legacy for my great-grandchildren and future generations. I'm 84 years old, and I keep learning and documenting more. And as a member of the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington, I imagine a Seattle tour guide 100 years from now bringing attention to our strong heritage values, such as being honest and showing resilience. Through these values and similar values held by other ethnic communities, not just ours, we have shaped the Northwest community and the American experience.
Hi, my name's Joe Abo, and I'm relatively recent, actually, compared to Dee, to the Omoide group, which we really enjoy attending every month. Anyway, my story is one of the assignments that Janine gave us, which was to interview a picture. The title is Dad Tames a Sparrow. This photograph shows my father, Tadayasu Abo, feeding a small bird in the Tule Lake concentration camp in 1942. In the background is our home there, a bleak, tar-papered barrack. A stovepipe sticks out of the roof for the potbelly stove inside. But there is no smoke coming out. The white snow on the roof is in stark contrast to the black tar paper nailed on the side of the barrack. It is winter, but my father's not wearing a jacket over his shirt. In Olympia, Washington, he used to work outdoors, harvesting oysters in all kinds of weather. The sun must be out, as indicated by the shadow on his forehead from the bill of his cap. The bushes in the back of him are barren of leaves. A small sparrow sits on his right shoulder, eating something out of his mouth as he looks down at it through his round metal frame glasses. I wonder how Dad got the bird to land on his shoulder and eat something out of his pursed lips. It must have taken him a lot of time to tame the bird to do that. How did he do it? What inspired him to feed the bird? The photograph shows a kind and patient man who made a friend in a cold and barren land. Dad even looks like he's smiling at the bird. My father was about 32 years old then and worked as a cook in the mess hall. He must have felt cooped up indoors, where he had a regular schedule, cooking 3 meals every day. His tasks were probably routine and tiring. But training a bird to eat out of his mouth, now that was something.
Hi, my name is Rakuko Rubin, and have been a member of Omoide for the past 2 years. I only write in Japanese because I'm from Japan, and my husband translates all my writings for me. So today I'm going to have him read for me. My title in Japanese is Minedoka o Sagashite. Jay?
Finding Minidoka is the title of the story. Minidoka relocation camp? The young woman in the tourist office asked, cocking her head. I think I may have heard of it. Any of you guys know where she means? Minidoka, said a middle-aged man in a cowboy hat who was looking through travel brochures nearby. It's a long way from here. We were driving home to Seattle from Los Angeles. The date was June 18th, 1998. We had been to breathtaking sites in California, Arizona, and Utah before arriving in Idaho, where the dusty plains stretched off into the distance with clumps of sagebrush baking under the noonday sun. I was just a boy when the camp was out there, but I remember it very well. Our farm was right next to it. Are you Japanese? The man asked, looking at me. Yes, I answered simply, watching him for any sign of racial prejudice. There's nothing left of the camp anymore, he said. That was more than 50 years ago. You think it would be pointless to go out there? Well, there is a marker at least. I can draw you a map. He asked the young woman for a sheet of paper and a pencil. My parents were Italian immigrants, he said, while sketching the map for us. Fortunately, the government didn't put us in any concentration camps. Oh, and while you're out there, take a look at the houses in the area. Most of them used to be camp sheds. They've been fixed up and enlarged, but they still have that shape. We found the remains of the camp after 2 more hours of driving through the desolate landscape. Atop a low rise beside a curving stream, a stone chimney came into view above the rolling prairie. Around the chimney and its fireplace stood fragments of stone foundations and a stone wall topped by informational plaques. A fierce wind caught us when we stepped out of the car, and we had to hold our hats down as we tramped among the ruins. The inscription on one plaque read, "You are standing at the entrance area of the Minidoka Relocation Center, August 16th, 1942 to October 26th, 1945. In front of you stands the waiting room, which was often filled with visitors." A large wooden sign mounted on the wall gave the bare facts of the incarceration, concluding, "May these camps serve to remind us what can happen when other factors supersede the constitutional rights guaranteed to all citizens and aliens living in this country." The sign mentioned wartime hysteria, but it said nothing about the racial hatred behind the incarceration of people of Japanese ancestry, while white immigrants from the Axis countries remained free. Fortunately, the government didn't put us in any concentration camps, the man in the cowboy hat had said. The empty plains and howling wind told us more than the sign about the lives of those who had been forced out of their homes on the West Coast to spend 3 years in the desert.
Thank you, Jay. I'm Mary Albo. I was born in Juneau, Alaska, and a lot of my stories that I write in Omoide are based on stories that my older sister told me. So she's the source of a lot of my inspiration. My story is called Papa and Mac. Papa stands in the snow with his hands on his hips. He's wearing his white chef hat, cook's jacket, and apron. He looks like he's in charge of his part of the world. His young friend Mac took this picture for him. Working every day of the year, my brother said, no one works harder than Papa. Since the 1920s, his customers came in like clockwork after their shifts. Miners, longshoremen, cannery workers, and fishermen ordered their meals like boiled tongue with horseradish, fried liver and onions, and stewed beef Spanish. Nothing was wasted at Papa's Cafe. He found a use for everything. Suet from the butchered side of beef was boiled with lye to make soap. Bones scraped clean of meat were boiled with vegetables to make stock for soups. Empty muslin bags that once held 100-pound sacks of rice were used for dish towels. Mac, who came to Juneau in the 1930s from Seattle, was looking for adventure in Alaska. Newcomers like Mac were called Chichacos, to be distinguished from old-timers like Papa. Mac worked with other Japanese at the Alaska Laundry and joined them to eat at the City Cafe. He seemed a cut above with his city ways. A camera hung around his neck and a jaunty black beret. Papa was proud of his filling meals at the cafe, but one day he overheard some grumbling from Mac. Papa rushed from the kitchen to the front counter and yelled at him, "What's the matter, you? You don't like the food? Eat someplace else." Mac left as fast as he could and never came back to the City Cafe. Juneau was on high alert after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. The city enforced blackout curfews, and bomb shelter drills in the schools. The Japanese were ordered out of Alaska into concentration camps in the deserts. The alien men were sent to Santa Fe and their families to Minidoka. After 3 years of separation, Papa was finally paroled and joined us at Minidoka. He got a job as a cook in the mess hall, and like the other cooks, wore a white apron and chef hat. Every day, hundreds of incarcerees lined up to get their daily rations of food. One day, Papa saw Mac in line and rushed out to him, shouting, "Son of a gun!" After the war ended, Papa returned to Juneau and Mac returned to Seattle. After Minidoka, the two men never saw each other again, but parted as friends.
Hi, I'm Nanako Mizushima. My father immigrated to the United States shortly after World War II. And it wasn't until a little before he passed away that I found out that his uncle came to the United States many decades before he did. So this photo is probably taken around 1924 of Dr. Eisuke Ishikawa and his family. I'm going to tell the story from the point of view of his daughter. I was in first grade in this 1924 photo they took in San Francisco. We were so happy then. Papa looked so proud. His hospital, Nippon Hospital, was built with help from George Shima, the Potato King. Papa's dressed like he's ready to go to one of the Potato King's fancy parties at his Berkeley mansion. Papa's English wasn't perfect, but he charmed everyone. Even the mayor was happy to shake the hand of the Japanese doctor. But my little brother Robbie looks ridiculous in the Lord Fauntleroy outfit Mama bought at the Emporium. Luckily, I lost my baby fat and wasn't considered bad looking by the time I was at Stockton High years later. But that's when my nightmare began. On Thanksgiving Day, my senior year, Papa was driving Mama and me home from Christmas shopping when a drunk truck driver plowed into our car. Luckily, Robert wasn't with us. He was playing basketball with his buddies when the police called him. Mama and Papa were killed instantly. I woke up in the hospital, and the doctors told me I would never have children. I was so mad at God. My life was ruined. And then the judge decided Robert and I couldn't be awarded any damages because my Nisei brother was just a teenager and I wasn't an American citizen. The elders decided we orphans had to go to Japan to live with relatives we didn't even know. I was ready to kill myself in Tokyo. I was even more of a freak in Japan than in America. I didn't fit in. Thank God, Henry, a Nisei friend of the family, offered to marry me and let me come back to America as his wife. I wasn't in love with Henry then, but I was grateful. I underestimated my little brother. Robbie managed to learn enough Japanese to graduate high school and then go to Papa's alma mater, Jikkei Medical School in Tokyo. Even though I couldn't have kids, I still thought I could be auntie to Robbie's kids when he came back to America. But then Pearl Harbor happened. Oh my God. Robbie was trapped in Tokyo. And then we were forced out of our home in San Francisco. But even surrounded by barbed wire, my patriotic husband, Henry, was one of the first to volunteer for the Military Intelligence Service. I was furious. How dare he leave me alone in Manzanar to fight for a country that treated us this way? I made him promise to find my brother and bring him back. But that promise killed him. When Henry finally came back from the war without my brother, he was depressed and wouldn't or couldn't tell me what happened. It was only after Henry killed himself that I found out Robbie had renounced his American citizenship. Why? Oh, why did Robbie do that? It was only years later I found out General MacArthur had asked my brother to interview the survivors of the atom bombs. After writing that report, I guess Robert couldn't stomach the idea of being an American anymore. So I was all alone in San Francisco until Robert finally convinced me to move to Tokyo to be near him and his Japanese wife and kids. But I know he felt as lonely as I did in Japan. So after I died, my restless spirit came back home to America so I can tell you this story.
Thank you, Nanako, and all of the people who read for you today. I hope you enjoyed our presentations and our writings. And now we're open for questions if you have any.
Okay. Thanks so much to all the readers. And do we have any questions from the audience? I've got a couple questions here. Well, while people are thinking, I was wondering, Dee, you've been doing this for this amazing group I'm so inspired by. What's something that really has surprised you or has been rewarding for you since you started this group so many years ago? And maybe you never imagined it would keep going this long. So what's something that you didn't expect?
Well, one time in the early years, around 2003, we became part of the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington. And we got a grant and we went to some social studies teachers conventions in Washington State. And I was invited to, for several years, do a yearly presentation at this juvenile detention center in Kitsap County. And one of the kids there, I would always start the program by saying, how many of you had something unfair happen to you? And everybody raises their hands. And this one kid, out of about 18 kids that were there, was so excited that he called his dad right away and got money and bought some Omoide books. And that was really fun and rewarding.
Oh, wonderful. How about any of the other participants who are here for you? How has it been?
When I go to the classrooms at some of the schools, there's usually, up 20 or 30 kids. And so I ask each one of them if they can go to somebody and find out about their own history. And one of the kids had a ancestor who was Sacagawea.
Wow, that's amazing. Any of the other readers? Oh, go ahead, Mom.
So, Dee, maybe you could show the audience the books that you've published at JCCW.
Sure. Here's can you see that? Let's see. It's backwards. And
no, it's okay.
There's another one. And then we did a video with some of the stories, and we were part of the Seattle Film Festival, and we got chosen because of this video to do a presentation at one of the theaters.
And it's also interesting because when Dee started, several people have passed on. So that's why our group is constantly changing because of the ages that we are. We are multi-age. And so when Dee gets these stories collected and printed, it's a real legacy that she does feel an important part of our community. And then Lori has a book coming out, right, Lori?
Oh, thank you very much, Mary. I was expecting to have books to actually show you, but here's the cover of a book. Again, it's a children's story, and it's based on my grandmother and babysitter, my real life grandmother and babysitter. My grandmother was a picture bride, and this was a way for me to remember their experiences and to share it with the upcoming young people in Hawaii and everywhere across the country. I think that every family has an origin story like this. Everyone has a brave Mrs. Sato in their family history that they might want to remember, that they might want to interview. And so this book was not just to remember what happened in my family, but also to encourage other young people to remember what happened in their families, write down their own origin stories, and speak to people who are still alive.
And also, our son had this book self-published for Joe, and the story that he read today is included in the story. And this is what everyone can do. Because of Omoide, every one of us has collected like 20 or 30 stories. So it has been a real wonderful gift for Andy to give Joe. And it's self-published, and everybody could do this.
Yeah, that goes nicely into, we've got some questions from the audience. So Kathy Masaoka, you want to just ask your question? You can unmute yourself, and I think this is a great question.
Well, you kind of started answering it, but I was wondering what has been the responses of your family members, the younger ones, to your stories?
The Nakanishi family is my husband's grandfather, and my husband and I, because of all of this, have written several books. And so our family, here, I'll show you the books. We've done some family books, and we're doing some more, because my husband did cartoon strips for the North American Post for 5 years before he died. And we're going to be publishing that also.
Well, also, I think it's not a usual thing for family members to sit around and tell stories. So I think writing it down in a book is a good way to share stories. And just because Andy had this book published for Joe shows that you know, it means a lot to family members to have this evidence of our lives before.
One of the results from our family is that my granddaughters, who are 14 and 16 at this time, are starting to participate in some of my projects. And that's been gratifying.
One of the things that I like about our class is that we get to revisit our past, like really maybe trying to figure out how our parents operated. What were they like? I mean, we didn't have time growing up to really delve into this, but when you have time to write about them, you spend a lot of time, as Janine said, you have to get into their character. You have to kind of put yourself in their situation. Case I want to work on a conversation that I could have with my mother at the age that I am now. I think that would be very interesting and an interesting exercise.
Anyone else from the group? I see Ots in the audience there. If you want to say something? No? Okay. Well, we have another question from Hannah Maruyama. Hannah, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. I guess, well, my grandmother passed away in 2020, and she just never really got to the point where she could talk about her story that way. And I think, some people are natural storytellers. That was maybe not her most natural skill. But I'm curious if you have advice for others who are interested in recording their memoirs about how to write and how to get started with that.
I can respond to that. And I wrote a little note on the chat about one idea, and that is basically just you don't need to give yourself like lots of time. If you give yourself like 20 minutes a day and sit down, and either if you want to interview somebody else, just make a list of questions that kind of you're curious about, or if you want to write your own, make a list of places you've lived or people you've known. And then just take one of those things and the next day write something that comes to mind. And the really important thing is to trust yourself, trust your memory. Some people doubt themselves. They'll say, gee, I wonder if it was raining or I can't remember, so I won't write it down. But just do free writing, trust yourself. Because the writing process is several stages. If you get everything on paper, then you can go back in a few days and look at it and go, oh, let me fine tune this. But that's this put the bloody words on the bloody paper thing. If you don't put them down on paper, then you're kind of stuck. And everybody can write. Everybody's got a story. The other piece of advice is think of the senses. Think of what things smell like, what things taste like, what things sounded like. And again, trust yourself if you're writing about a scene. Or again, you can interview somebody else and ask them some of those same questions. That's just a starting point. The other thing is to find somebody else who likes to write and share your stories, but you have to kind of make rules and trust yourselves. Some listeners have a tendency to tell you what you should do. We don't want to tell writers what they should do. We want to encourage them to do what they know how to do. The shoulds come later. That's just a place to start. I think Nana has something to add to that. You've got your hand up.
One of the things that I learned before I even got started on our first book was that to keep the interest of a reader, it's good to have an incident that starts something like one day this happened, and you tell about what happened that day. And then you add the smells and the hearings and the temperature and so forth to the story.
Oh, Nanako, did you want to make your comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Hannah, I understand that. I think for a lot of the people who actually went through the situation, it's very hard to talk about it. And my parents said nothing for most of my life. And I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. There's really not a Japanese American community there. So Omoide was the first time for me to join a group where there are other Japanese Americans and the focus is on Japanese American stories. But I knew that my parents were keeping something. They weren't telling me. So I kept asking. I said, so what made you decide to come to the United? Because they came after the war. They came to the United States after the war. And finally, I think, like a year or two before my dad passed away, he started saying a few things. And so from that, I managed to track down his relatives, the people that were in the photo that I talked about. And the little boy that's in that photo, I finally met him. And he was 93 at the time, Robert. And so I had a chance to talk to him, and he told me a lot of things which, just wouldn't be written down anywhere. And from that, so one of the things he mentioned, my dad mentioned, was that, he wrote the first report about the atom bomb. And this book is a textbook based on that first report, that I think it was being used by the American school in Japan or something. But so what my dad's cousin wrote so many years ago, right after the atom bomb was dropped, still exists. And I just thought, that's wonderful that it's here, but I definitely felt like there needed to be a story to kind of explain who he is, what my dad's relatives were doing in California, and how he ended up being, in Hiroshima to write this report. And then, of course, his sister, who was in Manzanar.
Oh, thank you, Nanako.
I want to answer
Lori?
I want to answer Kathy Maso.
Oh, yeah, about the group process? Yeah. And then back to Lori.
One of the things that was really was that Chuck Cotto and Margaret Baba and Yasuda and Del Uchida, we just sat around and had coffee and just started sharing, thoughts with each other. And you need that socialization and energy to get going. And then we picked out some of the interesting things that we talked about and got each other to write about it.
Okay, great. Just to add on to what Dee and Nanako said, it starts with talking to people. I never called my grandmother Mu Baba. My older cousins did. So I asked them about that. And they would say, oh, yeah, we called her Mu Baba because they ran the dairy. So getting your stories is from asking other people who might remember and have their own memories. So that's one thing you can do, Hannah, to just kind of get the information, gather the information. And I was a journalist as a career. And so I was used to collecting information about other people's stories. And so it's been great in retirement to be able to collect information about our own family stories and put them down so the next generation knows about the perseverance and the hardship and, yeah, even the funny things that happened to our ancestors. It's been really gratifying. So the sooner you start, the better.
We have a question from James Okamura. James, you want to ask it? I don't see where you are on the screen.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll just read it. Obviously, there can be many sensitive topics to write about, and there's the aspect of writing as therapy as well. And how do you manage confidentiality amongst your group of writers?
I think it's a matter of trust. Like, we've been working, our core group has been together like 10 years, almost 12 years, I think. I've kind of always say 10 and I realize, oh, it's been more than that. But it's really a work, it's a group. What am I trying to say here? We take the time to work, and people do bring up sensitive things from time to time. we haven't had an opportunity or experience with somebody hurting somebody else. The thing that sometimes comes up is a sister might tell a story, share it with her sister, and that person will say, it didn't happen that way. I don't remember it that way. You're wrong. So that's the important thing about memoir is siblings, and this has happened in my family too. Siblings, even though you're in the same situation, the same place, you might bring your own life to the story and it might be different. So you have to, if that happens, you have to kind of honor the other person's, story and belief. And I think as Dee has mentioned, we remind ourselves of the Japanese principles. I mean, it is an Omoide writing group. I'm in several different writing groups. This one is very special because the stories that come out come from a very painful time for some people. And we just really honor everybody's memories and really respect that people have taken the time to write them down. Anybody want to add to that? That's my answer.
Well, also, I'd like to add that writing is very good for our brains. And having the assignment to do something every month, we learned that even if the story doesn't go anywhere, it has really helped us memories and to make connections and to ask even relatives about facts that you might need, like I asked my sister. So I think what's unique about our Omoide group, as someone has said before, is that we're all Japanese Americans. So there's that commonality among us. And a lot of us don't see each other socially, but we meet once a month in Seattle. And some of us don't even belong to a Japanese group. So this is one connection we have. I think one commonality is that we all grew up with parents who are very Japanese. And so that's what we're learning is how did they raise us? How did it affect us? And how is it affecting our children? And I think that's incredibly interesting.
One of the writers that I particularly have been drawn to is an English person by the name of Ian McGilchrist. And he wrote, The Master and His Emissary and several books. And he was got his first degree from Oxford University and then went to Johns Hopkins for become a psychiatrist. And the reason I particularly was drawn to him is because my master's thesis was on the difference between the right and left brain. And Ian McGilchrist says that the Western culture is built on the left hemisphere, and that if we want fulfillment and balance, that we need to add right hemisphere activities, and a lot of them could come from the Asian community. But when he cites an example, he always cites a Japanese example for some reason. And my guess is that the Japanese culture had 200 years of isolation from 1600 to 1800. And they brought a lot of their cultural and art activities to a science, like a PhD research. And so then that's been incorporated into our lives. And a lot of the gurus that I listen to on YouTube all are part of jiu-jitsu because they think that's the kind of thing that they should add to their life. And so I'm thinking that our Japanese stories are going to help our whole American community.
Oh, well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And I like that comment also that Hannah said that this is a social activity, which, we often think of writing as being solitary, but obviously you all have gained from actually writing together and listening to each other. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And also passing on the stories to your families, many of who are here today. So thank you, family, also for joining us. So any other comments from the Omoide group people? I'd love to hear. Well, any last thoughts about things that you would advise or things that you've gained from the group, being in the group? Go ahead, Nanako.
Omoide,
And then
yeah.
Lori.
Oh, I think every group has, different reasons for writing. And I think the Omoide group is focused on writing down your memories and your past experiences. And I think, and I'm sure that's definitely one purpose of writing. I think in my case, I've decided to take the stories and things I've collected from my family and turn them into fiction, into a novel. So that's what I'm working on. But I think, there are many different reasons for writing. And I think one reason for me trying to write it as fiction is because of the nature of the stories that Japanese Americans have, that they're very sensitive and a lot of trauma. So trying to process that trauma, trying to figure out, well, what does that trauma mean? Not just for my family, but for anybody who can read the story. So that's all.
Thank you. Yeah, processing. Laura, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to answer Ryan's question, which I already did on the chat, but he asked, as a reporter, what were some of the most important interview questions you asked people? And as trite as it sounds, I said, and then what? And that opened doors. People would just reveal so much about their thoughts and feelings and reactions and how they resolved their situations. It was a very handy question. And then what?
Well, that's a great tip. Okay, Mary?
On what Lori said too, is when we write our stories and we comment, it's always interesting when someone asks a question that had not occurred to us. Our story spurred something in their mind, a curiosity that we had overlooked. So that's the value of sharing our stories.
Let me add to what Mary said, and this answers the earlier questions about trust. And we have a structured response to people's stories. It's not that people read the story and we say, oh, that's nice, because that's not helpful. So when someone reads a story, we go around and we tell that person something that we noticed, something that we liked, something that affected us. And we do that for a few minutes, and then we go back and people ask a question. What color was the sky? Who else was with you? And like Mary said, it prompts people to write things down. And at the very end, if someone has a suggestion, then you suggest something. But that process becomes very important. You tell, you ask, you suggest. So if you start a group, that's one way to kind of structure your group so that you're talking about the story. The thing you have to be careful with in a group too is stories prompt other stories. And the rule I've always had in other memoir groups is you have to write it down. You can't just tell a story, you have to write it down and then come back to the group and read it. So I hope that's helpful.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And that brings us up to the hour. Wow, we spent 90 minutes with you. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if there's one last burning question out there or one last burning thought from our participants. I've really enjoyed this time with you and learned so much. And again, if you missed something, this recording will be on JAMP or Tadaima's YouTube channel, and you'll be able to watch it there again. And if you were thinking of starting your own writing group, here's some great ideas for you to start with. And you can always contact anybody in the group here, Dee or Janine or Lori or anybody, and they'll help you get started or give you some tips. Okay. They'll give you some tips for getting started. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you continue to join us on Tadaima. It goes till the end of the month, and have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.